Captain Tahoe Kim walked into the Great Hall of the Galactic Federation for the first time. His steps echoed in the massive room. He looked up at the high ceiling with its moving star map. The Federation building was on a space station far from Earth. Tahoe had spent 6 months traveling to get here. "Remember, Captain, we are new here," said Commander Nera Park, walking beside him. Her uniform matched his, dark blue with the Earth symbol on the shoulder. "Earth only joined the Federation last year." Tahoe nodded. "I know our place, Commander." A large screen at the front of the hall showed the seating chart. Each species had its own section. The strongest and oldest members sat at the front. Tahoe found the human section easily. It was in the very back row. "Of course," he said with a small smile. "The back row. Again." Nera checked her tablet. According to the Federation rules, seating is based on species strength, technology level, and time as members. They walked toward their seats, passing many alien delegates. Some looked like insects with hard shells. Others had scales or fur. Many stood twice as tall as humans. Near the front rows, they passed the Volari delegates. The Volari looked like massive tigers walking on 2 legs. They had armor-like plates on their orange and black fur. Each one carried ceremonial weapons and stood 3 meters tall. One of the Volari noticed the humans and laughed. His name badge read Ambassador Krax. "Look, the soft skins are finding their proper place," Krax said loudly. His voice was deep and rough. "In the back, where the weak belong." Other Volari laughed. Tahoe kept walking, his face calm. Nara touched his arm gently. "Not worth it," she whispered. They reached their seats in the last row. From here, they could see the entire hall and all the other species. "Maybe the back isn't so bad," Tahoe said quietly. "We can see everyone from here." Nera nodded and set up her recording equipment. "That's why Earth chose us for this mission. We know how to watch and learn." The Federation president, a tall blue alien with 4 arms, called the meeting to order. The hall became quiet. "Welcome to the 354th Galactic Congress," the president said. "Today we discuss trade routes in the Orion sector." For the next 3 hours, different species argued about space lanes and trading rights. The Volari demanded the largest share, pounding their fists when others disagreed. Tahoe noticed something interesting. When arguments got heated, the president always called on the front row species first. By the time it was the back row's turn to speak, decisions were already made. During a break, Tahoe and Nera stepped into a quiet corner. "Did you see that?" Tahoe asked. "They don't really care what we think." Nera smiled. "But that gives us an advantage. They don't watch us either." A small green alien approached them. He had large eyes and moved carefully. "You are from Earth?" he asked in a soft voice. Tahoe nodded. "Yes, I'm Captain Kim, and this is Commander Park." "I am Delegate Lim from Proxima 3, the alien said. "We also sit in the back. The Volari don't listen to us either." "How long have you been in the Federation?" Nora asked. 50 years, Lim said. "And still in the back row. The strong species never change their minds about the weak ones." Tahoe looked thoughtful. "Maybe they should. Sometimes the quiet ones in the back see things others miss." Lim seemed surprised. "You're not angry about your position?" "No," Tahoe said. "From the back row, we can see everything that happens in front of us. That's valuable." As they returned to their seats, Ambassador Krax passed by again. "Enjoying the view from the back, humans?" he asked with a sharp-toothed smile. Tahoe smiled back. "Very much, Ambassador. It's quite educational." The Volari frowned, not understanding, and walked away. Nera leaned close to Tahoe. "Earth Command wants regular reports. What should I tell them?" Tahoe watched the Volari take their seats at the front, their backs to the humans. "Tell them we're exactly where we need to be," he said. "Sometimes the back row is the perfect place to learn how the galaxy really works." Nera nodded and made a note on her tablet. Neither of them knew it yet, but their position in the back would soon become the greatest advantage humans could have. 3 weeks passed. Every day, Taiho and Nera sat in the back row of the Federation Hall. They watched, they listened, they took notes. Sending today's report to Earth, Nara whispered as she tapped on her tablet. The data would take 6 hours to reach home, even with the fastest signals. Tahoe nodded. He was watching the Volari delegates argue with the insect-like Krith over mining rights. The Volari were loud, showing their teeth and claws. The Krith clicked their mandibles but backed down quickly. They always win by being loud and scary, Tahoe said. Nera smiled. But they never ask why the mineral deposits are important to the Krith in the first place. This was the pattern they had seen for weeks. The strongest species got what they wanted. No one questioned them. After the meeting, Tahoe and Nera walked through the station's main plaza. The space was huge, with shops and eating places from 100 worlds. They chose a quiet corner table at a food hall. "Look at the report I'm preparing," Nera said, showing her tablet to Tahoe. "I've tracked every vote for the past 3 weeks. The front row species win 94% of all arguments." Tahoe stirred his drink. "And the other 6%. The front rows let the middle rows win small things to keep them happy," Nera said. "The back rows win nothing." A shadow fell over their table. They looked up to see Ambassador Krax standing there with 2 other Volari. "Humans," Krax said with a sneer, "always huddled in corners, whispering. What secrets could weak creatures like you possibly have?" Tahoe stood and gave a small bow. "No secrets, Ambassador. Just discussing trade reports." Krax laughed. "Trade? Your planet barely has ships that can reach the next star. What could you possibly trade that matters?" "Information is valuable too," Nara said quietly. The Volari laughed again. "Information without power is useless," Krax said. He leaned closer to Tahoe. "Remember your place, human. The back row is where you belong." After the Volari left, Tahoe sat down again. "They don't even try to hide their feelings. Which makes them easy to read," Nara added. The next day, the Federation Hall was unusually full. Delegates from all worlds crowded in, even species that rarely attended meetings. The Federation president looked worried as she called for quiet. "We have grave news," she announced. "A new threat has been detected at the edge of Federation space. A species we call the Void Swarm has destroyed 3 outer planets." Images appeared on the main screen. Dark shapes moved like clouds across star systems. Planets turned gray and lifeless as the shapes passed. "The swarm consumes all organic and many inorganic materials," the president continued. "They leave nothing alive." The hall erupted in shouting. Species argued about what to do. Ambassador Krax stepped to the front. "The Volari will lead the defense," he shouted. "Our warships are the strongest. We will crush this swarm with force." Many species cheered. The Volari were known for their powerful ships and weapons. Tahoe turned to Nera. "Did you see those images? The swarm doesn't move like a normal fleet." Nera nodded. "They split apart and rejoin, almost like insects," Tahoe finished, "or a hive mind." Tahoe raised his hand to speak, but the president didn't see him, or pretended not to see. The Federation voted quickly. The Volari would lead a battle fleet to destroy the swarm. As delegates left the hall, Tahoe sent a private message to Earth Command. "Urgent situation. Federation facing new threat. Volari leading response with direct force. Request permission to share alternative analysis." On their way back to their quarters, they passed Delegate Lim from Proxima 3. "The Volari will save us all," Lim said, but he didn't sound sure. "Maybe," Tahoe said. "But I wonder if anyone asked what the swarm actually wants. Why they consume what they do." "Questions the back row asks," Nara said with a small smile. "That the front row never thinks about." Later that night, Tahoe received Earth's response. Permission granted. Activate protocol silent observer. Tahoe looked at Nara. It begins now. From the back row, she agreed. Neither knew how important those words would soon become. The emergency alarms woke Tahoe at 300 station time. Red lights flashed in his quarters. His communication device buzzed with urgent messages. Captain Kim to the Federation Hall immediately, said the computer voice. He dressed quickly and met Nara in the hallway. Her face was serious. The Void Swarm attacked a Volari colony, she said as they hurried through the station. Tolax Prime. Population 50 million. Tahoe's steps faltered. Casualties. Unknown, but the reports say it's bad. The Federation Hall was chaos. Delegates shouted and argued. Many looked scared. The main screen showed live images from Tolax Prime. The planet's surface was covered with moving dark patches. Cities burned. Volari ships fired weapons that seemed to do nothing. Ambassador Krax stood at the front, his fur standing on end with rage. We need all Federation ships now, he roared. The swarm came without warning. They ignore our strongest weapons. The Federation president called for order. All worlds must contribute to the defense fleet, she said. The Void Swarm must be stopped before more planets fall. An older human woman in a military uniform approached Tahoe and Nara. Her name tag read Admiral Julie. Earth's military advisor, she said quietly. Just arrived yesterday. Admiral. Tahoe greeted her with respect. Have you seen the battle data? Admiral Lee nodded. The Volari attack head-on with their largest ships. The swarm splits apart, surrounds them, then reforms. Classic swarm tactics. Like insects defending a hive, Nara said. Exactly. Admiral Lee looked troubled. But the Volari keep charging in, using the same failed approach. The emergency meeting continued for hours. The Volari demanded more ships, more weapons. They wanted to build a larger fleet and attack with even more force. Admiral Lee raised her hand to speak. The president finally acknowledged her after calling on 20 other species. If I may suggest, Admiral Lee said calmly, the swarm's pattern indicates a distributed intelligence. Direct force is ineffective against such enemies. Earth has experience with nothing. Ambassador Krax interrupted. Your primitive world has never faced anything like this. The Volari have fought wars for 10,000 years. The hall grew quiet. Admiral Lee didn't raise her voice. And yet, the swarm defeated your forces in hours, she said. Krax snarled, showing sharp teeth. You dare. That is enough, the Federation president cut in. We will follow the Volari plan. They have the strongest fleet and the most battle experience. Admiral Lee sat down. She exchanged looks with Tahoe and Nara. After the meeting, they gathered in a secure room. Admiral Lee activated a jamming device so no one could listen. Earth Command sent me with new orders, she said. We're activating our own defense systems. Without telling the Federation, Nara asked. Admiral Lee's face was grim. They won't listen anyway. You've both seen how the Federation works. The strong lead, even when they're wrong. Tahoe nodded. What do you need from us? Keep watching. Keep reporting. We need all the data you can get on the swarm's movements and behavior. And Earth? Nara asked. Director Doyen Kang is leading the defense preparations, Admiral Lee said. He calls it Operation Backrow. Tahoe smiled at the name. Fitting. 3 days later, the Federation fleet engaged the swarm near the Tolax system. The Volari led the attack with their largest battleships. The battle lasted less than a day. The Federation lost 40% of its ships. The swarm barely slowed down. In the Federation Hall, Ambassador Krax was no longer boasting. His fur was dull, his voice hoarse. We need more ships. Bigger weapons, he insisted. Tahoe watched from the back row. He sent a secure message to Earth. Frontal attack failed as predicted. Swarm adapts to direct force. Send all Tolak's battle data to Director Kang. That night, Admiral Lee showed them a secret report from Earth. Director Kang had analyzed the swarm's movements and found patterns the Valeri had missed. The swarm isn't random, Admiral Lee explained. They target specific resources, and they communicate constantly within their network. A weakness? Nara asked. Admiral Lee nodded. Perhaps, but we need more data. Which we'll get, Tahoe said, from the back row, where no one notices what we're doing. For the first time since the attacks began, they felt a small hope. Sometimes, being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all. Nara hadn't slept in 2 days. Her eyes were red as she stared at the screens in their small office. Tahoe brought her a cup of hot tea. You need rest, he said. Nara shook her head. Look at this first. She pointed to a map of the galaxy. Red dots showed where the Void Swarm had attacked. Everyone thinks the swarm moves randomly, she said, but that's wrong. Tahoe looked closer. They're following some kind of path. Yes, they always go to planets with high amounts of certain metals and minerals. Nara moved her finger across the screen. And look at the timing. They stay at each planet for almost exactly the same number of days. Tahoe's eyes widened. They're harvesting, on a schedule, which means we can predict where they'll go next, Nara said. This was big news. If the Federation knew the swarm's next targets, they could evacuate people and prepare defenses. Nara requested time to speak at the next Federation meeting. Her request was put at the very end of a long list. When her turn finally came, most delegates were tired and not paying attention. Based on my analysis, Nara explained, the Void Swarm will attack these 3 systems next. She showed a map with the planets marked. Ambassador Krax laughed. The human thinks she can predict the swarm. What arrogance. The Federation president looked at her watch. Thank you, Commander Park. We'll consider your analysis. This meeting is now over. Nara was given only 2 minutes to speak. No one asked questions about her findings. As they left the hall, Admiral Lee met them. They didn't listen, she said. It wasn't a question. No, Tahoe replied. But we expected that. I sent your predictions to Earth, Admiral Lee said. Director Kang wants to deploy the new tracking system. What tracking system? Nara asked. Come with me. Admiral Lee took them to a small ship docked at the station. Inside was a human man working on what looked like small metal balls. This is Engineer Sun Woo Choi, Admiral Lee said. Earth's top drone designer. Sun Woo looked up and smiled. The famous back row observers. I've read all your reports. He held up one of the metal balls. It was the size of a fist. This is a whispered drone, he explained. It can track the swarm's communication signals without being detected. Tahoe picked one up. It was lighter than it looked. How many do we have? 200 ready to deploy. Sun Woo said. They'll give us a complete map of swarm movements and let us listen to their communications. Nara looked impressed. The Federation has nothing like this. Because they're too busy building bigger guns, Admiral Lee said. While they focus on force, we focus on information. The next day, Earth ships secretly deployed the Whisper drones near the 3 systems Nara had identified. They didn't tell the Federation. 5 days later, the swarm attacked exactly where Nara predicted. The Federation was caught by surprise. Again, their direct attacks failed. In an emergency meeting, Ambassador Krax pounded his fist on the table. How did they defeat our strongest ships? He demanded. We need even larger weapons. From the back row, Tahoe watched silently. The Whisper drones were sending data every hour. Earth now had more information about the swarm than anyone else in the galaxy. That night, they received a secure message from Director Kang. Pattern confirmed. Swarm uses central communication nodes, vulnerable to targeted disruption. Continue observation. Remain in back row. Nara looked at Tahoe. Should we tell the Federation what we know? Tahoe thought for a moment. They wouldn't believe us. And if they did, they'd take the information and still do it wrong. So we keep watching, Nora said. Yes, from the back row. Tahoe smiled, where we can see everything. On their way to their quarters, they passed a group of Volari officers. The once proud warriors looked tired and worried. They had lost another battle. Your species is lucky, one Volari said bitterly to Tahoe. Safe in the back row, while we die fighting. Tahoe said nothing. The Volari didn't know that being in the back row wasn't about safety or weakness. It was about seeing the whole picture, when those in front could only see what was right in front of them. Tahoe was working late in his office when there was a soft knock at the door. He opened it to find a small alien waiting. The creature had blue skin that glowed faintly in the dim light. Captain Kim, the alien asked in a whisper. I am Jinsu of the Minari. May I speak with you privately? Tahoe let Jinsu in and closed the door. The Minari were rarely seen at Federation meetings. They were a quiet species that looked like glowing amphibians. How can I help you? Tahoe asked. We sit in the back row too, Jinsu said. 3 rows behind your section. We have watched you in Commander Park. You see things others miss. Tahoe was careful. We just pay attention. As do we. Jinsu touched a device on his wrist. A hologram appeared showing swarm movements. We have been tracking the enemy too. Our findings match Commander Park's predictions. Tahoe tried not to show his surprise. Why are you telling me this? Because the Volari ignore us, just as they ignored you. Jinsu's large eyes blinked slowly. But together, perhaps we can do more. The next day, Tahoe introduced Jinsu to Nora, Admiral Lee, and Engineer Sunwoo. They'd met in a secure room away from the main Federation areas. The Minari have developed bioluminescent technology that can detect swarm energy signatures, Tahoe explained. Jinsu nodded. Our bodies naturally sense energy fields. We have created devices that can do the same. Sunwoo looked excited. If we combine that with our whisper drones, we could track the swarm with perfect accuracy, Admiral Lee finished. Nara was studying the Minari data. Your tracking system shows similar patterns to our predictions. We call it the path of hunger, Jinsu said. The swarm consumes specific elements in a specific order. A new voice spoke from the doorway, just like a recipe. They turned to see a human woman enter. She wore a science uniform with the name Dr. Minji-yoon on her badge. Earth's leading xenobiologist, Admiral Lee introduced her. She arrived yesterday. Minji walked to the hologram and studied it. The swarm isn't just eating randomly. They're building something with these resources. Building what? Tahoe asked. I don't know yet, Minji admitted. But if we combine the Minari detection technology with our drones, we might find out. Jinsu looked hopeful. An alliance? Yes, Tahoe said. A back row alliance. Over the next week, more species approached Tahoe and Nara, all from the back rows. All ignored by the stronger species. All with pieces of information or technology that could help. The small green Proxima 3 delegate, Lim, brought sensor technology that could scan swarm composition. The insect-like Krith offered underground shelters on threatened planets. 6 more species joined what they now called the Back Row Coalition. Each brought something valuable. Meanwhile, the Federation's main fleet, led by the Volari, suffered another massive defeat. 3 more worlds fell to the swarm. In the Federation Hall, the mood was dark. Species accused each other of not doing enough. The Volari blamed everyone but themselves. Your ships are too slow. Ambassador Krax shouted at another species. Your weapons are too weak. From the back row, Tahoe and Nara watched silently. Their coalition was growing stronger while the Federation was falling apart. That evening, they received an urgent message from Earth. The combined human Minari drones had discovered something important. The swarm ships have a central node, Director Kang explained in the secure transmission. It controls smaller units within a certain range. Destroy the node, and the smaller units become disorganized. Like cutting off the head, Admiral Lee said. Exactly. Director Kang's face was serious on the screen. We've also detected something else. The swarm is building something massive at these coordinates. A star map appeared, showing a location deep in space. What is it? Nara asked. We don't know yet, Kang admitted. But they're gathering enough resources to build something the size of a small moon. After the call ended, Tahoe turned to the others. Should we tell the Federation? Admiral Lee shook her head. Not yet. They'd rush in with their biggest ships and alert the swarm to our knowledge. Then what do we do? Minji asked. Jinsu, the Minari, spoke softly. We continue as we have. Quietly. Carefully. From the back row. Where we can see everything, Tahoe said, and they can see nothing of what we do. The back row coalition was small compared to the Federation's forces, but as Tahoe was learning, size and strength weren't always what mattered most. Sometimes, the quiet observers in the back were the most dangerous of all. We caught one, Admiral Lee announced as she entered the secure room. Her face showed both excitement and worry. Tahoe and Nara looked up from their data screens. Caught what? Tahoe asked. A swarm scout ship, small one. The combined human Minari drones detected it moving ahead of the main swarm. We managed to trap it in a special containment field. This was big news. No one had ever captured any part of the swarm before. Where is it? Nara asked. On its way here now. Very secretly. Admiral Lee checked her watch. Specialist Hanbin Ryu is bringing it. He's our top swarm researcher. 2 hours later, they gathered in a hidden lab deep in the human section of the station. Few knew this place existed. The Federation hadn't asked what humans did in their own areas, and humans hadn't told them. The captured swarm unit was inside a glowing blue field. It looked like a dark, moving cloud the size of a small car. Up close, they could see it was made of millions of tiny machines, each no bigger than a grain of sand. A man in a protective suit was studying it. He turned when they entered. Captain Kim, Commander Park, he said, removing his helmet. I'm Hanbin Ryu. Welcome to our little secret. Hanbin showed them what he had learned. The swarm wasn't alive in the normal sense. It was a vast network of tiny machines that worked together, like a metal version of an ant colony. Each tiny part is simple, Hanbin explained. But together, they form a kind of intelligence. They can build, repair, and adapt. What controls them? Tahoe asked. Hanbin pointed to a slightly larger machine at the center of the captured unit. This is a subnode. It gets orders from larger nodes, which get orders from the central intelligence. Like a brain, Nara said. Exactly. Cut off the connection to higher nodes, and the smaller units become confused. This was the weakness they had been looking for. The swarm's strength was also its weakness. It needed constant communication between its parts. Jinsu of the Minari joined them. His skin glowed brighter with excitement when he saw the captured unit. This confirms our theory, he said. The swarm operates on specific energy frequencies. If we can disrupt those frequencies, we can break their communication, Hanbin finished. The next day, an urgent message arrived from Director Kang on Earth. The Whisper drones had found what the swarm was building. A massive structure that looked like a giant transmitter. We think it's designed to call more swarm units from another galaxy, Director Kang explained. If that was true, the Federation faced not just the current swarm but potentially thousands more. Time was running out. As they worked on a plan, the door to the lab slid open. Ambassador Krax stood there with 4 Volari guards. Their weapons were ready. So this is where the humans hide, Krax growled. What are you doing with swarm technology? Tahoe stepped forward calmly. Research, Ambassador, to understand the enemy. Krax's eyes narrowed. The Federation has not authorized this research. This is stolen swarm material. Hand it over immediately. We captured it ourselves, Admiral Lee said, using technology we developed. All swarm materials belong to the Federation Defense Council. Krax insisted, which the Volari lead. Tahoe looked at the others, then back at Krax. I'm afraid we can't do that, Ambassador. This research is crucial. Krax snarled. You dare defy the Federation. Your weak planet has no standing toe. He stopped as alarms began to sound throughout the station. Red lights flashed. A voice came over the speakers. Emergency alert. Swarm forces detected approaching the station. All personnel to defense positions. Krax's communicator buzzed. He answered it, his face growing pale as he listened. A swarm attack force is heading directly for us, he said after ending the call. Our ships are mobilizing, but they won't arrive in time. The station had some defenses, but nothing that could stop a major swarm attack. Perhaps we can help, Tahoe said quietly. Krax looked at him with surprise. How could humans possibly help now? Tahoe nodded to Admiral Lee. She pressed a button on her communicator. Deploy the Sentinel fleet, she ordered. Outside the station, in the darkness of space, small ships suddenly appeared. They had been hiding, cloaked, for weeks. The ships were unlike any the Federation had built. Smaller, faster, with no weapons the Volari would recognize. Krax stared at the screen showing the Earth ships. What are those tiny vessels? They cannot possibly stand against the swarm. Tahoe smiled slightly. Size isn't everything, Ambassador. Sometimes it's about being in exactly the right place. The small Earth ships moved into position around the station, ready to defend it. The silent observers from the back row were about to show what they could really do. The station's main view screen showed the approaching swarm. It looked like a dark cloud moving through space, blocking out the stars behind it. Your little ships cannot stop that, Ambassador Krax said, his voice filled with fear and doubt. Admiral Lee stepped forward. They're not meant to stop it through force. Watch and learn, Ambassador. The small Earth ships, the Sentinel fleet, moved in perfect formation. They didn't charge directly at the swarm as Volari ships would have done. Instead, they spread out and began moving in strange patterns. What are they doing? Krax demanded. They need to attack. Tahoe shook his head. No, they need to observe first. On the command channel, they could hear the Earth ship captains talking. Node signals detected, Sector 4. Confirmed. Pattern matches analysis from captured unit. Targeting frequencies locked in. Ready to deploy disruptors on your mark. Admiral Lee gave a simple command. Execute Operation Backrow. The Earth ships suddenly released thousands of tiny drones. The drones moved quickly toward the swarm, not firing weapons but sending signals, the exact signals the swarm used to communicate. Signal confusion deployed, reported one ship. Swarm communication patterns disrupting. On the screen, they could see the effect immediately. Parts of the swarm began to slow down. Some sections moved in random directions. The massive cloud that had been so organized was becoming chaotic. What's happening to them? Krax asked, his eyes wide. We're speaking their language, Nara explained. But we're giving conflicting orders, like having 10 people shouting different directions at once. While the swarm was confused, the Earth ships moved closer. Each fired small, precise weapons at specific points in the swarm. The nodes Hyunbin had identified. Direct hit on communication node Alpha. Node Beta destroyed. Node Gamma targeted. The effect was amazing. Large sections of the swarm stopped moving altogether. Other parts began attacking each other, unable to tell friend from enemy. The station's alarms stopped. The immediate danger was passing. Impossible, Krax whispered. Your tiny ships stopped them. Not with force, Tahoe said. With knowledge. We've been studying the swarm while you've been trying to smash it. The Federation Council called an emergency meeting. For the first time, humans were not sent to the back row. Tahoe, Nara, and Admiral Lee stood at the front, explaining what they had learned and how they had stopped the swarm attack. The swarm isn't a single enemy, Admiral Lee explained. It's billions of tiny machines controlled by communication nodes. Disrupt the communication, and they become harmless. The Federation president looked stunned. Why didn't you share this information before? Tahoe answered honestly. Because no one was listening. Every time we tried to speak, we were dismissed or interrupted. Many delegates looked uncomfortable. They knew it was true. The greater swarm is still building their transmitter, Nara continued. We need to stop it before they can call reinforcements from beyond our galaxy. Ambassador Krax, unusually quiet, finally spoke. How do we stop something that large? Even with your disruption technology, the main swarm body is massive. Admiral Lee displayed a hologram showing Earth's plan. Operation Vakro has 3 phases. We've completed Phase 1, proving the disruption technology works. Phase 2 requires a coordinated attack on all major communication nodes. Phase 3 targets the central intelligence of the entire swarm. The Federation Council debated for hours. Finally, they reached a decision that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Humans would lead the defense of the galaxy. As the meeting ended, Tahoe approached Ambassador Krax. We'll need Volare ships as well, Tahoe said. They have the speed and power our smaller vessels lack. Krax seemed to struggle with his pride, but finally nodded. You will have them. The Volare know how to follow orders, even if, he paused, even if those orders come from the back row. That night, a combined fleet prepared for battle. Earth ships would lead, with their disruption technology. Volare ships would follow, using their powerful weapons once the swarm was confused. Ships from other back-row species would provide specialized support. As Tahoe watched the fleet prepare, Nara stood beside him. It's amazing, she said. A month ago, they wouldn't even let us finish speaking at meetings. Tahoe smiled. That's the advantage of the back row. They never see you coming. The next day, the fleet departed for the final battle. The fate of the galaxy now rested on the strategy developed by those who had once been ignored. The combined fleet was 3 days into its mission when the emergency transmission came through. Tahoe, Nara, and Admiral Lee were in the command center when the Federation president's face appeared on screen. The swarm has changed direction, she said, her voice shaking. They're heading directly for Earth. The room went silent. This wasn't part of the plan. The swarm shouldn't have known Earth was important. How? Nara whispered. We've been so careful. Admiral Lee's face hardened. Someone told them. Someone who knows our plans. The Federation president continued. We've called an emergency vote. The Council has decided to redirect defensive forces to protect core Federation worlds. You're abandoning Earth, Tahoe said. It wasn't a question. We regret this necessity, but the Volare colonies contain far more citizens and resources. The vote was nearly unanimous. The transmission ended. Tahoe looked at Admiral Lee. Nearly unanimous. Ambassador Krax voted to help us, Lee said, surprising everyone. He sent a private message saying the Volare fleet will still follow our plan. But it won't be enough, Nara said. Not if the main swarm is heading to Earth. Tahoe was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled slightly. They think they've found our weakness, but they don't understand what Earth has been doing all this time. Operation Vakro wasn't just about the fleet. Admiral Lee confirmed. Director Kang has been preparing Earth's defenses for months. They opened a secure channel to Earth. Director Doyen Kang appeared on screen, looking calm despite the news. We've been expecting this possibility. Director Kang said, the swarm believes it's found our center of command. They don't realize that was part of our plan. What plan? Nara asked. To bring them where we want them, Kang said. Earth's orbital defense system is fully operational, and it's unlike anything the Federation has seen. The view changed to show Earth from space. Thousands of small satellites surrounded the planet, so many they looked like a thin shell. The quiet shield, Kang explained. We've used everything we learned from studying the swarm to build their perfect opposite. 3 days later, the swarm arrived at Earth. From the fleet, now rushing back to help, Tahoe and the others watched on long-range scanners. The swarm approached Earth, its massive cloud form blocking out the sun from parts of the planet below. It seemed unstoppable, just as it had at every other world it attacked. But then something different happened. The quiet shield activated. Each satellite sent precise signals that targeted the swarm's communication system. Not to confuse it this time, but to freeze it completely. Large sections of the swarm stopped moving altogether. Other parts tried to push forward but moved slowly, like they were stuck in thick mud. The shield isn't attacking them, Nera realized. It's silencing them. On screen, they could see Earth's defensive ships moving out from hidden bases on the Moon and Mars. They were small, like the Sentinel fleet, but there were thousands of them. The ships moved through the frozen swarm, targeting each communication node with surgical precision. Where the swarm managed to fight back, the ships didn't engage directly. They retreated, regrouped, and approached from another angle. No frontal assaults, Tahoe said with pride. No wasted resources, just smart, precise attacks. Admiral Lee nodded. The strategy of those who've had to be smarter, not stronger. The strategy of the back row. The battle lasted 14 hours. When it ended, the swarm around Earth was completely neutralized, broken into billions of inactive particles. When the fleet arrived, they found Earth untouched. Not a single human life lost. Ambassador Krax, arriving with the Volari ships, stared at the screens showing Earth's defenses. "You had this capability all along," he said to Tahoe. "Why pretend to be weak? Why accept the back row if you could fight like this?" Tahoe smiled. "Because the back row was exactly where we needed to be. To watch, to learn, to prepare without being noticed." As reports came in from across the galaxy, they learned something else. The main swarm, thinking it was attacking the human command center, had committed most of its forces to Earth. The transmitter it was building was left with minimal protection. "Phase 3 can begin immediately," Admiral Lee said. "We can target the Central Intelligence while it's vulnerable." Tahoe looked at the map of the galaxy. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe they might actually win this war. "All because we were underestimated," he said quietly. "All because we sat in the back." The combined fleet approached the massive structure the swarm had been building. It floated in empty space, far from any star system. Up close, it was even more impressive than in the scans. The structure was the size of a small moon, built from materials taken from dozens of planets. "The transmitter," Admiral Lee confirmed. "If they activate it, they'll call more swarm from beyond our galaxy." The fleet took position around the structure. Earth ships formed the outer ring, their sensors scanning for swarm communication signals. Volari battleships formed an inner ring, weapons ready. Ships from other species filled specific roles based on their strengths. Tahoe, Nara, and Admiral Lee stood on the bridge of the lead ship. Beside them were Ambassador Krax and representatives from the Back Row Coalition. "Scans show minimal swarm activity," Nera reported. "Most of their forces were sent to Earth." "We've identified the Central Intelligence," said Hyunbin over the communication channel. "It's at the core of the structure. That's what controls the entire swarm network." Admiral Lee turned to Krax. "This is where we need Volari's strength. Once we disrupt their communications, your ships must break through to the core." Krax nodded, standing straighter. "The Volari will not fail." The attack began. First, the Earth ships activated their disruption technology, sending waves of conflicting signals through the swarm's network. The effect was immediate. Swarm units around the structure became confused, attacking in random directions or freezing completely. "Phase 1 complete," Admiral Lee announced. "Volari fleet, begin your approach." The massive Volari battleships moved forward, their weapons firing at the weakened swarm defenses. Behind them came specialized ships from the Back Row Coalition. Each played their part in the carefully planned attack. The Minari ships detected hidden swarm units and marked them for the others. The Proxima 3 vessels used their advanced shields to protect the attacking ships. The Krith sent small, fast drones to target specific weak points. It was a perfect example of what different species could do when they worked together based on their unique strengths. The battle was fierce but shorter than expected, with most of the swarm at Earth and the rest confused by the disruption signals. The combined fleet broke through to the core of the structure. "We've reached the central chamber," Krax reported from his ship. "The intelligence core is visible." On screen, they could see it, a pulsing, dark mass that looked different from the rest of the swarm. It was larger, more complex, with swirling patterns of energy moving through it. "The brain of the entire swarm," Hyunbin said in awe. Krax's ship launched special missiles designed by Earth engineers. They didn't explode with force. Instead, they released waves of energy that matched the exact opposite frequency of the swarm's communication. The effect was dramatic. The core writhed as if in pain. Its patterns became erratic. Then, slowly, it began to dim. "It's working," Nara said, watching the readings. "The core is shutting down." Across the galaxy, reports started coming in. Swarm units were freezing in place. Some fell apart into inactive particles. Others simply drifted in space, no longer a threat. The war was over. The galaxy was safe. 1 month later, the Federation Council met in a new hall. The old seating arrangement was gone. In its place was a circular chamber with no front or back rows. All species sat in equal positions around the circle. The Federation President stood in the center. "Today marks a new beginning for our alliance. We have learned that strength comes in many forms. Intelligence, observation, and cooperation can be more powerful than force alone." She turned to where Tahoe, Nara, and the Earth delegation sat. "We offer Earth a position on the High Council, with full honors." Tahoe stood. "We accept with gratitude, but I have one request." "Name it," the president said. "The Back Row Coalition proved its value in this war. All those species deserve recognition too." The president smiled. "Already done. The new council includes representatives from all major contributors to the victory." After the meeting, Ambassador Krax approached Tahoe. The once proud Valeri seemed humbler now. "I never understood," Krax said, "why humans accepted the back row without complaint. Now I see it was strategy all along." Tahoe nodded. "On Earth, we have an old saying about education. The best students often sit in the back of the classroom." "Why?" Krax asked, genuinely curious. "Because from there, they can see everything that happens in front of them. They can observe, learn, and prepare while no one notices them." Krax looked thoughtful. "A powerful strategy. The Valeri have much to learn from humans." As they walked through the new circular hall, Nara pointed to where several species were taking seats around the edge of the room. "Look," she said with a smile. "Even with no official back row, some still choose to sit there." Tahoe laughed. "Smart species. They've learned the most important lesson of all." "What's that?" asked Krax. "That sometimes," Tahoe said, "the greatest power comes from being underestimated. The galaxy would never make that mistake about humans again."